Okay, good morning, everyone. On Wednesday, we started discussing research methods, and the whole idea of this unit is to get a sense of how it is that we do research in psychology, the basic steps of research and basic decisions that we have to make so we can draw a conclusion about our study. The way we do the study is going to affect the type of conclusion we can make, okay? So we talked about what different types of psychologists do, and I'm focusing now on research psychologists for the two lectures, the process of psychological research, and we'll return to that. And we started to discuss different types of research designs. We talked about a correlational study. And what we found in the question we had been asking, whether alcohol causes aggression, and for our hypothesis, our prediction about the characteristics of what's going to happen between our variables, where our hypothesis was the more alcohol a person consumes, the more aggressive they become, we found that it wasn't the best answer to our question because there was the possibility that there was something else causing alcohol or something else causing aggression. It's ambiguous whether it's alcohol that causes aggression, aggression that causes alcohol. So that's a potential problem with correlational research. It's very effective at finding relationships among variables, not so effective for trying to determine if something causes another thing. Okay, if alcohol causes aggression. So what other alternatives do we have to try and figure out that issue? Oops. So what is an experiment? You've undoubtedly heard this word before. When someone says, I'm going to do an experiment. Now, a lay scientist might be thinking of something they want to try out, you know. I'm going to do an experiment on my roommate. What if I change the lock to see what happens, okay? I don't mean that kind of experiment. Or let's do an experiment where everyone does walk out of here at 10 o'clock and see what happens. Not that kind of experiment. What do we mean by experiment in psychological science? Well, an experiment has some very specific characteristics. So for tackling that question, does consuming alcohol cause aggressive behavior? If we were to do an experiment, one thing we would have is a dependent variable. This is our outcome variable. It's a measured variable in the same way that when we had correlational studies, we were measuring variables. Okay, so we have a dependent variable, which essentially is an outcome variable, the variable or the thing being caused, the thing being affected by a cause. Okay, it's what we're going to examine. In this case, it's aggression. In an experiment, we also have a manipulated independent variable. And this is one of the defining characteristics, which is why it's in bold. In experiments, we have something we manipulate, something that we come in as an experimenter and we try to alter or change, something that we try to achieve a certain level of that. So I'm going to try to achieve a certain level of alcohol consumption. Now, my independent variable is the causal variable. It's the thing that I manipulate here. It's the thing that I try to vary and that I specifically control to get at a certain level. It's also the thing that affects the dependent variable. So you always want to think, IV, independent variable, causal variable, dependent variable, outcome. So let's say I were to do an experiment. I would want to manipulate people to either have alcohol or not have alcohol. The second defining characteristic of an experiment, of a true randomized experimental design, a true randomized experiment, is that there's randomization. Randomization. Okay, what do we mean by randomization? We're referring to a way of assigning participants to different conditions or different experimental groups, a way of putting participants at different levels of the independent variable. Alcohol consumption, no alcohol consumption. It's determined completely randomly whether a person ends up in one group or the other group. It's completely by chance.
Why do we bother doing that? I mean, it seems like kind of a hassle to do that. Why don't I just say, all right, you guys will all get alcohol, you guys won't get alcohol. So I have to say, you will randomly be in this group or that group. You will randomly. That's a kind of a headache to do. Why do we do that? The rationale is we want our two groups to be the same at the start of the study, so that when I, the experimenter, come in and manipulate something, try and affect something, try to make something happen, I know that later when I measure aggression, any differences between the two groups in aggression is because of something I did. How do I know that? Well, because you guys were all the same in the beginning. There was no difference. And the only thing that happened here, you were all the same, is that I did one thing to one group, nothing to the other group. If they're different at the end, it must be because of something I did. So that's the logic of randomization. It's a way of increasing the chances that your experimental groups are essentially equivalent at the start of the study. Okay, sometimes randomization means making the order of conditions random when people are going to get more than one level of the independent variable. But those are the two defining characteristics of a true randomized experiment, often just referred to as an experiment. It's that there's a manipulated independent variable, in this case alcohol consumption, in randomization. Now this is not the same, randomization, also called random assignment, is not the same as random selection or random sampling. And those two often get confused. So random sampling, random selection, that's a way of recruiting people and trying to get people into your study. Okay, it's a particular set of methods to try and create a representative sample. Okay, technically it means that any person in this room has an equal chance of being in my study if this is the population that I'm interested in studying. That's different. You know, that's putting you in my study. It's different from the way that I decide who's going to be in what condition or what order of conditions. So try not to confuse those two. Okay. Why do I have asterisks right there? Because that's what's going to differentiate. Randomization is what differentiates an experiment from what I'll talk about in a little bit from a quasi-experiment. Okay, so that's why those stars are there. So here's the neat thing about experiments, is you can actually ask a question about cause. I can ask the question that I'm most interested in. Sure, it is interesting if alcohol and aggression go together, but ultimately what I want to know is alcohol causing aggression? I may also be interested in whether aggression is causing alcohol, but one question at a time. Let's tackle first alcohol causing aggression. And again, the reason experiments are very effective at getting at questions of cause is because the experimenter controls what happens to participants, varies exactly what happens to participants, and therefore, at the end, they can infer that any difference in groups of participants is because of something that the experimenter did. Okay, that's the key there to getting at determining if alcohol is the cause, as opposed to, say, pre-existing differences among participants. So here, our hypothesis would be slightly different than what we had for the correlational research. It could be something like people who consume alcohol, that's our experimental condition, are more aggressive than people who do not consume alcohol. All right, so let's say that you didn't choose where you sat. Instead, I sat you in certain spots, and this side of the room are the people that are going to get alcohol, and this side of the room are the people that are not going to get alcohol. Now, would I ever really do this with Psych-120 students? How many people here are 21? Okay, how many people? Less than the majority. The majority are not 21. So this is not an experiment I would do with Psych-120 students. And we'll get back to, well, what else could I do? One thing I could do then was go back to my correlational study, right? I'll just ask you. I won't give you alcohol. I don't have any the ethical or legal ability to do that. But instead, maybe I'll just ask you. Yeah, but you're going to say, you know, I'm 17. I'm not supposed to be having this stuff, so you may not be honest in your responding, and I wouldn't blame you. I don't think I'd be honest either about it. So that was one of the problems with our measure, our self-report measure on Wednesday. You know, I get dishonest responding. Okay? But just humor me for a moment, and let's say that you're not in Psych-120. Let's say you're all 35, and for religious reasons,